Hello, I'm Eli Machen with Show Up 365, and today I would like to try to clear up some confusion around the struggle that couples have in recovery and understanding the dynamics of building trust. And I've got what I call today the 6 key concepts of building beyond sobriety necessary to build trust. And so I'd like to break that down today and in this video to kind of go a little deeper, explain a little bit more of what it is, the struggle between the spouse and the addict and this building trust process. So I call this the 6 key concepts beyond sobriety necessary to build trust back in a relationship. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do, or I'm trying to show, is that trust building is all about making sense out of the chaos that a person has lived with when they've been gaslighted, deceived, confused, betrayed in certain ways that somewhere in their gut they knew something was wrong. There were pieces out there that they needed to put together and basically couldn't, and created a chaos. Now, the chaos obviously was in the relationship. Chaos was obviously in life. But more importantly, it was chaos inside their own brain, inside their own spirit, their human spirit. So that's what I'd like to address and help you to understand that part of trust building is making sense back out of that mental chaos that's gone on in their lives. Now, remember this dynamic. It's those of you who are in my Building Unshakable Trust program, you'll see that you'll know this part, but I want to give you to those who have not gotten in that program yet, to an understanding that the key function of the limbic system is to come up with negative stories, negative memories of things that happened in the past, and rehearse them. In other words, if some dynamic goes on in the universe of this person that's been betrayed, then, or anybody, it doesn't make any difference with the addict or the co-addict, it happens in both worlds, is that our limbic system has a tendency to remember the worst possible case scenario. And then when dynamics come up, similarities come up in the whole process there of that person's life, then they link that to it. So it's like something smells, tastes, feels, senses very close to something in the past. Then the limbic system comes up with that negative memory and goes to the worst possible scenario. Now, that's key to understand, because it may not have anything to do with directly what the addict is doing right now in that life, in the relationship. Now, remembering the character and actions of an addict is a part of that limbic system and what they do. Now, what happens is that the spouse of an addict didn't know, or may not have been realizing, the depth of things that have been going on in that lifetime that they had with that addict. But they remember the character traits. They remember the nuances. They remember the evasive responses and defensiveness around questions asked. They remember a lot of the nuances around the addiction, whether they knew the behavior was going on or not. And so that limbic system remembers that. The limbic system takes those dynamics and runs to the worst possible scenario. And every person's got an end story in their limbic system. And it is never very pretty. That story in the limbic system is quite negative. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But the point of that whole thing is that that's how we have survived over the years. The limbic system is said thousands of years ago in the caveman's life, as he was out hunting with Billy Bob the caveman down the road or down the valley, and another Jimbo up the way here, and caveman Jimbo, and they were all out hunting one day, and Jimbo and Eli saw Billy Bob being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And so they remembered this, and they remembered what it felt like, what it sounded like, what it looked like, and all the dynamics that were around that attack from that saber-toothed tiger, and what Billy Bob did not do to stay safe. He didn't run fast enough, or he wasn't cautious. Now, that story stays in the mind. Now, Jimbo and Eli, cavemen, they survived and alive today through generations and generations and generations, because we know what a saber-toothed tiger smells like. We know what an environment of a saber-tooth is. We know what it sounds like when they growl, and we know to run when we hear one. Now, we've lived because of that, and that resides deep in the limbic system. We don't even have to think about it. Something happens in our environment that reminds us of saber-toothed tigers, we're going to run. Now, that's the same dynamic that's kept us alive. And so the limbic system says, what I do works, don't knock it. The problem is we end up running from saber-toothed tigers that are no longer there. And that's the point I'm trying to bring out here. Now, long before the addict knew something's going on and you were digging your hole, you didn't realize that you were building up not only a deception of behaviors and choices that you were doing along with your addiction, but you were building up a dynamic in the relationship that created this nuance of distrust. Now, whether the co-addict or the spouse of an addict ever knew anything about what was actually going on at the time, they do remember all the nuances and things you were doing while you were busy digging your hole in your addiction or whatever else it was. Now, here's the dynamic. Every spouse of an addict has got a timeline in their mind, or at least in the human spirit. I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere back in there, probably in the limbic system, that they can remember times and nuances. Partly because in some of the research I've done recently is that we can't effectively deny something exists without having to know it was there to begin with at some level. And not being willing to deal with the emotional impact of that reality, we deny. I know, I did it. I get that. Now, there's this timeline you see up there. There's this point where earlier in the relationship, maybe there was denying certain events that happened that you were challenged with, and the spouse is challenging, and you deny it, and you minimize, and you do the addict two-step kind of thing, and it's like you kind of dance around it, you evade. And then there's the times when it's not being where you said you were going to be. In other words, you said you were going to be somewhere else, and it turns out you weren't there, you were somewhere else, or you were late. Uncountable time. Time in your life where it's like there's these blocks of time where you're totally unaccountable and don't want to be accountable to it. And the spouse remembers those periods of time that's not recognized. So any time in your life that today that is unaccountable is a trigger to remember that. Then there's the defensive and angry responses to being questioned. You know, you're deflecting actually with that anger. You're trying to get them to back off of questions. Back in the day when you're busy digging your hole, you were trying to get them to back off of questions because you didn't want to go to the truth. You wanted to stay, you wanted to continue to deceive and lie and whatever else. And so bottom line is that anything that they pick up from you that's deceptive or angry or defensive around a question or a request for clarification, bottom line what happens is they pick up you're acting out. Now the other deal is this. Dismissals of inappropriate relationships. When you blow off your spouse's alarm system that this person, whoever you're connecting with, whoever you're around, whoever you're hanging with, whoever you're doing work with, whatever that associate is, their alarm bells are going off, and it may be for a very good reason. Now, you may think, I'm sober, I'm safe, and whatever else, but this is not about sobriety. And remember, I'm talking about what goes beyond sobriety. If your spouse's alarms goes off about a person, then drop it and run. If you want to build trust for that relationship. It has nothing to do with what you think you're doing inside of you, because back in the day when you're busy digging a hole, they didn't know this, but they also know these nuances in these relationships. You cannot measure trust building based on what you think you're doing to be sober. And the last and key thing here is vacancy. That means you're just not there. I don't care if it's in the middle of having sex, if it's being at a dinner time, if it's being at any other time. When you're sitting there and you're not home, either it's in a conversation or it's something kind of where they're trying to connect with you in some way. And, you know, the light may be on the porch, but there's nobody home. That is an alarm, because back in the day when you were acting out, you were disassociating all the time. You were fantasizing. You were somewhere else in your world. You either reminiscing about some event that's happened earlier in your life, or you're going back into the future. You're going into the future and fantasizing about what can happen. You're vacant. You're not there. And one of the things that they're going to look and learn over time is that are you really showing up at the short place, and are you really there? So if you're checked out, own it. If you're somewhere else mentally, then tell them where you are, what's going on, what you're struggling. Be transparent. Now, I'm going to talk about some of those things in just a minute. A lot of addicts get confused with the sense that when they get to the sobriety, they've achieved some great task. Well, they were out digging this hole, in the relationship where the spouse thought, that was never there. Well, they always assumed or suspected or thought that sobriety was where it was from the beginning. And here it is, all this time, you've been digging yourself your own grave with your addiction. Now, so getting back to sobriety, you may celebrate that with your recovery guys, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's a good achievement for your recovery. but not necessarily just for trust building. That's getting back to ground zero. Okay? So that's sobriety. Now, can you celebrate that? Absolutely. And there are times spouses are at a good place that they can celebrate that to you. But that's celebrating getting back to ground zero. That's getting back to that's putting the bar on the ground and saying, okay, step over it. That's where you should be all along. You just got back to it. Now, that doesn't count a whole lot in the other trust building that needs to take place as far as your characterological stuff that's going on. What's going on in here? What's going on in the dynamic in the relationship? Now, when they married you, they assumed you were already at ground zero. So achieving it once again is not going to bring you a whole lot of kudos and so forth in that. The real rub is going to be is that you got to get from ground zero to the next level. And that's all that dynamic, all that nuances, all that's going on that's in between what you should have been doing and where you are in your character. And this is what triggers the spouse oftentimes in being afraid of, something going on, which it may not be going. This is the character development. This is the consistency. And I'm going to go through 6 key concepts that addicts, if you will work on these things, and spouses, if you will watch for these things, then you'll know, okay, the addict in your life is really working to deal with character quality, character development, those character deficiencies that sabotage so much. And I'll cover those in just... All right, now we're going to move on to the 6 key concepts that I was referring to a little bit earlier before our break. Is this piece right here around understanding what you're going to do in building that characterological lifestyle, that relational lifestyle that you're going to have with your spouse in order to build that trust, not just the behavior of sobriety work in your program. That's important. Don't stop that. That's got to go on, and you got to keep consistent with doing that. But it's that piece that moves from there to that realm, what I call the realm of building trust. Now, the first key that I want to talk about here is that never ask if trust is there. If you do that, then you lose. You lose ground when you ask the spouse, do you trust me yet? They will tell you to stop doing certain behaviors of trying to be transparent, trying to be doing your check-ins. I mean, I've heard countless addicts tell me over time that somewhere along the process, the spouse looks at them and says, okay, stop it. You don't have to do this anymore. I trust you. Now, that's really key. But if you have to ask, you're not earning it. You'll know it when you get there and when they tell you, I trust you. But don't ask. Okay, that's not something you need to do. Stay away from that, because if you start asking, then you're off the track. You're going in the wrong direction. Now, the second key to this whole thing is that initiate 24-hour check-ins. Now, this is the key word there is initiate. You don't ever wait for the spouse to ask you, addict, if you are sober, if you're working your program, and how you're doing. Check in. A check-in means that this is where I am today. It's showing up to show up place and being buck naked with your spouse over and over and over, and it becomes so much a part of your life that you live without anything covering you at all. You live transparent. You live an open life of an integrity and honor. And by doing that, your character changes. And when your character changes, that's what your spouse was going to react to. So initiating the 24-hour check-ins, whether you're on the road and call in, you're text in, whatever you got to do to say, I'm good, I'm sober, I'm working my program, I am in the clear, I'm in green, or I'm not, and this is what I've done to do something about it. It's my job, my process, but I'll stay transparent with you all the way through. That's key. That's important. And consistently doing that over the years. What happens to many of the addicts that I've talked to is that they have come out of this life of deception and living in the dark and hiding all their life, lying about things that didn't even really matter. Living this way in consistent, rigorous honesty every 24-hour period of time, what they've learned is that they've brought this character development into a smaller package of manageable time frame to where that they did this over time. They actually did learn, and it became such an intricate part of them that they say, I live buck naked at the short place all the time with everybody. And it's such a freeing feeling. So you win too on this, but you've got to do this in order to do that. And when that transparency shows through, it's not just the check-ins, it's your living transparent in front of your spouse. That builds trust unbelievably fast. Now, the third key is this. Never humiliate or put down your spouse for mistrust and a doubt. You're the cause of their mistrust. You're the cause of their doubting anything you ever say, anything that comes out of your mouth. When your lips move, if they doubt it, that's your fault, not theirs. So don't ever humiliate. I would suggest this. Sweetheart, or dear, depending on which way you go with that, I understand you don't trust me, and rightfully so. What could I show to demonstrate that what I just said was true, or that I am actually so? I'll do it, whatever it takes. What would help you trust what I'm saying? Now, that kind of response would be totally different, especially if they get triggered. I mean, if some similar circumstance or scenario or dynamic takes place, and all of a sudden they go into a deep depression, or they just click over into sadness, and they're processing their grief and their loss. If you would just turn to them and say, sweetheart, I'm so sorry that I've hurt you. What do you need from me right now? I'm telling you, that goes miles down the road to their own healing. And that healing is really important for them in trusting you. Now, the next piece would be this. Key 4, maintain an inner circle of recovering people for the rest of your life. In other words, guys, if it's guys, for thousands of years, however long it goes back, spouses have known from cavemen days on that guys going out and hunting for food or fighting some other tribe or some other whatever group, that they weren't likely to come back. And if they weren't likely to come back, then their possibility of surviving was next to zero, and that their children would probably die too. Now, that means hearth and home is in danger when you're out there doing whatever you're doing. And that is so genetically into the female mind. And I'm not trying to put down women. That's not it. A lot of you women may be, employed and have tremendous jobs and all of that. That's not the point I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make is that that's genetic. It's only been in the last generation or so that women have become into their own freedom. They've been able to accomplish the things that they have. It's always been their ability. It's just that our society and time and where we are has never been there. Now, if you maintain that inner circle of guys that or women, if you're a female addict that you're recovering and you're trying to earn trust back, then you stay with other women who are trying to achieve the same thing and a little further down the road. Now, the key thing is this, and this is something my wife has said. I appreciate it when you keep those guys around you and when they kick you, so I don't have to. I don't want to do that. That's not my job. I'd rather enjoy the results of what your inner circle of men do in your life. I like you better. I like who you are when you show up that way. That's key. Now, key 5 is this. Don't explain away questions. The burden of proof is always on you, the addict, never the spouse. If they have a question about what's going on, answer it. If they need more information, then you give it to them. You provide the evidence of what you say you're doing is true. Whatever it takes, you go to whatever length to prove to them that what you say and what you're demonstrating is true. Because, face it, a lot of your relationship, you haven't done that. You said this and you've done that. So they're geared, they're trained, and to not believe in anything you say. So when they question, remember the burden of proof is on you, not them. Answer the questions. Don't explain them away. Don't minimize. Don't dismiss their questions. Respond to them in a compassionate way. Now, the compassionate, gentle responses you give to to questions, is about your character will always win out. When they question what you do and what you say, they're questioning your character. Well, let's face it, you've not had the character of integrity and honor and honesty and faithfulness. These are the character qualities you're building into your life. Now, as you build those from the sobriety line on up, over time, it becomes a part of your life. It's a way of life. It's a way of relating. And they respond to that. Spouses respond to that. And at some level, deep within, that's what they're looking for. Now, this is what I've got to say, and I want to encourage you to understand this, is that at this point, this is key. Work at this. The payoff is huge. Thank you.